computer. Okay, great. Hi guys. Thank you so much for joining today's workshop. And if you're looking at the recording, thanks so much for looking at the recording. Thank you everyone for donating to the cause. We've managed to achieve, well, not achieve. We managed to collect a number of 405 euros, which is 2/3 of the sum that's needed for the vaccines. I think they already bought the vaccines, and I did send 300 of those 405. I'll send the rest by the end of today. And I think they'll probably use this money for something else, but we did really help a lot. We did help a lot with the shelter with that sum of money, so thank you very much. Special thanks to Joseph Moscovici, Joseph Lewis, and Maurice Contel. I probably wrote the second name wrong, but yeah, they donated the biggest amount, and I decided to put them here because, you know, collectively they gave 15 waiver spots, all of which were filled. So this was they did not only did they help the dogs, but they did create a lot of opportunities. And thank you everyone who donated for either themselves or for other people. I know some people donated, for example, for themselves, and then another 10 euros. So you did buy a spot for someone else. And I hope this lecture is helpful for everyone. So I'm not a slides guy. I really hate that stuff. That's why I never became the stereotypical management consultant as most debaters do. So I decided to write it on a Word doc. I'm not sure if this is superior or inferior, but this is the structure that we're going to use. I decided to divide it onto 6 parts based upon the questions that you had. Each part may take different amounts of time, and it's supposed to take some kind of logical, chronological order, but that's in my head. So when we're done with all of the 6 parts, the whole picture will be in front of you and everything will make sense. That's why I said that in the beginning that maybe some questions will be answered later. So yeah, keep them either on your notebook or on a Word document somewhere. Okay, let's get into part 1. So what is part 1? Basically, I think many people, and to a certain extent based on the questions that we had, feel as if they're struggling with extensions, but in reality, they're struggling with debating itself, right? So this is similar to, for example, when you go to the doctor, right? And you say, doc, my head hurts, or my arm hurts, or something like that. And your intuitive response is it's a problem within the arm, right? Or the head, or something like that. But sometimes it could be something totally different. That's why that's connected in some way, shape, or form. That's why I wanted to give just a couple of brief suggestions to things that are outside of extensions. They are to a certain extent connected, but not completely, that may help you. So here are just a couple of ideas. So maybe you have argumentation gaps. What does this mean? By this, I mean that maybe you're struggling with, for example, generating analysis mechanisms, whatever you like to call it. Basically, the stuff that gives the probability of the argument, right? So when we're debating, let's say, positive discrimination, quotas for X group in X place, right? For example, minorities having 2 votes, or maybe women on board of directors, and we're running the standard backlash argument. And for example, we're analyzing only why people get mad, and not the why, when people get mad, what exactly will they do part, which is the more important part of the argument. It's a trivial argument now. It's a stock one, prepared one. So that's why I'm using it as an example. Maybe that means that you have argumentation problems in general. So how do you find out if this is the case? So I would advise you to do a couple of spars, maybe 5 or 6, where you're just top half. And so don't care about the results. You could be second, you could be first, you could be third, you could be fourth. The thing that you should check out is to see if the judge thinks that you are consistently not analyzing your argument to the adequate level. So for example, if you have logical gaps, if for example, maybe you did analyze it, but you analyzed it in a shallow way. So for example, you just say a word instead of actually explaining what the words mean in this particular case, then maybe you have a problem with the argumentation, and that's why you're failing at extension. So maybe you should double down more on improving your argumentation in this particular case. Same thing applies for tracking gaps. So maybe you are good at, let's say, building arguments. So you can fully build an argument with all of the premises, all of the explanations, all of the impacts, and these type of things, right? Because that's more or less how arguments work. You may also be good at rebuttal. You may also be good at framing. But for some reason, you are either consistently being told you're derivative, right? Something like that. Or maybe that you're not derivative, but that opening government already touched this material to a certain extent and you needed to differentiate. Judges usually send something along the lines of you are obligated because you're closing to differentiate for me in this particular case. Hold on, Lucas, are you letting the people in?
Yeah, I am.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to check. Okay, so why would this be a problem? The problem would be if you, for example, are not tracking in certain cases at all what your opening is saying, or maybe you're not tracking to that extent. So my kid brother, he's also a debater. He's just starting out, and the other day I was like in the room, doing something on my phone, and he had a spar. And while I looked at him, I noticed that he was like extending in something, and he completely repeated what his opening said. And I told him, look, dude, you didn't track anything. Everything that you explained, they said it, they explained it in this particular case. And he was like, yeah, I actually don't track them at all. So maybe people don't even think about the fact that they need to track what their opening is saying. So how do you notice this? Again, the same thing with the spars, but this time you have to be closing. And try to think of, again, don't think of the result. Don't think of winning. You shouldn't care about it's a spar if you have a first or second or whatever. What you should care about is how much are you listening to your opening team, and what is the way that you're tracking, and what are the problems that you're tracking. So for example, when you're tracking them, you could, for example, have the problem where you're tracking them on a similar piece of paper where your rebuttal is to all, or maybe that you're tracking them and you're writing very small so you can't see what you've written down in this particular case. Or maybe you have 10 papers in front of you and it's a mess of things and you can't systemize and focus everything. So you need to check your tracking. And in many of the cases, this is actually another part of the problem. Third problem is idea generation. Many people just go into the debate with two ideas, right? They think of the most intuitive ideas. Then in prep, they ask themselves, okay, what else? We keep quiet for 2 minutes. Then we agree, okay, it's these two ideas. They probably develop them to a certain extent. They go inside, the opening team takes both these ideas, they're fourth because they don't have anything else. So again, you are doing spars, right? That's the way that you are doing things. Or maybe you with your partner can sit down and have a prep. And if you're consistently having at least two ideas, or maybe not even two ideas, maybe even 3 and 4, but these 3 and 4 ideas are like weird and something like that, then you should focus more on improving your idea generation. And finally, judging gaps. So I think this is something that people don't necessarily think about, but a lot of the questions were, okay, how do I make non-experienced or straight up bad judges by my extension? Well, maybe it's because you haven't been in their shoes in this particular case, right? So maybe it's because you haven't judged with them. You don't know their psychology, what they're thinking, what they're interested in buying. In this particular case, like what are their triggers? What, for example, words do they need to hear in order to say, aha, yes, you have your extension in this particular case. So there's this like stereotype that judging works for improving only whips and deputies, which, to be fair, it's a lot closer to a whip speech. However, I think also a lot of extension speakers can improve by judging, by just seeing, okay, this judge bought this extension because of X reason. I should copy that. I should try to do more of this particular thing. The general rule of thumb is for every 4 comms that for every 3 comms that you're debating, the 4th one you should judge, if possible, right? And to be fair, judging is kind of accessible in this day and age. Like there's probably always some kind of online comp somewhere. There are spars here and there. You could, like, even if you can't go to a debate comp, you can judge 5 spars, which is the equivalent of going to a debate comp and judging there. And you also get the ability to network, talk with people, gain some feedback, do this particular case. So excluding judging, how do you improve each of the 3 things that I mentioned? Because all of the things that I explained so far, allocating and finding what is the problem, which, by the way, don't underestimate this part, because if you don't know if this is the problem, you should treat it like you are the doctor and the patient is the debater, right? You should treat as if the debater, you patient, like we don't know what is necessarily wrong with them. It could be one of these three things. We should try to find it out. That's why we should experiment. And then how do we improve? Well, the unfortunate reality of things is that in many cases, the only way you improve is by actually doing the thing. So if you have, let's say, argumentation problems, you can't generate analysis fast enough, or you can't generate analysis at all. You need to sit down with your partner, or maybe alone, but with your partner would be best. Like it could be in a coffee shop, or maybe if you like live far away from each other, you could do it over Zoom. And just prep motions, just prep arguments, as if put the 15-minute timer and make arguments. And the best way to do it is to have this based on themes. So let's say this week we're doing for feminism. We're going to meet up 2 times or maybe 3 times for about 1.5 hour or 2 hours each time. So that would be like 3 or 4 hours a week. It's not that big of a time commitment. And, just prep motions about feminism. And that way you see patterns of analysis. You see certain things that are repetitive, and you see what is the best optimized way for you to explain these particular things. So debating to a large extent is like going to the gym, right? When you go to the gym, like probably you go to the bench, and probably in the beginning you can't even lift without any like plates on. You just lift the what was the word for this? The metal thing, right? Then you start by putting like 2.5 plates. Then you put 5 plates, 5-kilogram plates. I'm sorry if there are Americans here in the other system. Yeah. And then you scale up progressively and slowly. And if you like train it if you train the bench 2 times per week, in 1 year, there are 52 weeks, you train it 104 times, you're obviously going to get some kind of progression into this particular thing. So there's just an element of grinding. The good news is you can systemize it. So if you have like a calendar, Google Calendar, you can book with your partner. And the other thing is, what I would advise is try to make it like fun. So for example, I don't know if you're into like video games, board games, watching series or something like that, but you could put a reward for yourself. So if I prep 5 feminist motions this week, then we can watch an episode of South Park or whatever it is you people are watching. And yeah, that's something like that. The same goes with tracking. There's actually an exercise down into this into this folder, into this file, but I'll just say it like here. The way you train tracking is you fire up a debate. It could be any debate you're watching, and like you're firing up a prime minister speech. It could be any debate. Don't do the finals ones because those are different. Do a random round of a competition somewhere. And while you are listening to that speech, try to develop an argument and try to track simultaneously. So you have one piece of paper, you're listening to what the PM is saying. You have another piece of paper, you're writing down your own case in this particular case. So you could do it either if you're opening opposition, so trying to also write rebuttals. But in this case, since we're talking about extensions, it could be the case where you get like 4 or 5 ideas before that. You fire up the prime minister's speech, you see where they're going, you're trying to develop the other ideas in this case. And that's how you train tracking. And then when that's done, listen to the speech again and see how many things you managed to catch and see if you missed something important. And the idea generation is also the same. Like you just sit down, you fire up like a 7 to 10 minute timer. You don't need to do the whole 15 minutes. And you just think of what are the maximum amount of ideas that I can generate on a motion. And that way you are scaling so you're scaling a couple of things. You're scaling the amount of ideas you have, you're scaling your ability to track, you're scaling your quantity, the quantity of analysis that you have, so that you become faster, better, stronger in terms of these things, so you can prioritize more time for other things. So for example, making the impact stronger, framing, strategy in the debate, and these type of things. And unfortunately, this is so I would say that 90% of the people present, if you do just this part without even us caring about the entirety of the other part of the workshop, you will see massive improvements. Like if you do this for, I don't know, let's say 3 months, or not even 3 months, just 1 month. If you do one of these, right, even without the whole point about analyzing yourself, but in general, but also the analyzing yourself part helps with prioritization. You'll get like way better in this particular case. So just to wrap up this part, maybe some of your problems with extensions aren't with the extensions themselves, but with the debating itself. This is the way for which you find out the problems. This is the way for how you develop those problems. Okay. So I put a disclaimer here. So I would like to start with, I assume that many of you, at least to a certain extent, have trouble with either breaking at competitions, reaching ESL semifinals, ESL finals, or open octos, open quarters, open semis, like even open finals and these type of things. I assume that this to a large extent frustrates you. And like, I also did debating for a long period of time before I broke as well, especially in the online era. Before I broke at my first major, I went for 17 competitions without breaking anywhere. So either ESL or open. So that's like 17 weeks of constantly getting my ass kicked and not being able to break. And to a large extent, it is in our control, right? Because what's on our control? Our capacity to develop ourselves, to learn more, to improve, and also within the debate, we also have some range of things to do, of choices. The fact of the matter is there are some arbitrary conditions that I want to just say here, and I want to basically say, I think just the act of me saying this out loud will give some people some comfort with this. So motions are generally shallow. This is true. Especially if some of you have been following the pre-WDC competitions last year. So the first was structural reasons, the other was Vienna. Honestly, many of these motions did not have bottom halves to them. Before that also, like their CA teams are giving motions without any depth. So there is a reason why this is happening. The reason why this is happening is when there is so much online debating, right, in general, that means that you kind of run out of giving new motions, right? So you have to either give stock motions or you have to like take risks and give some other obscure motion, or maybe a rewording of a similar motion, or maybe you're giving world schools motions without you knowing it. So this is the reason for why this is the case. I honestly think CAs should try to be more vigilant into finding more deep motions, and maybe they should even give more stock motions, even though they're not fun. At least they can be debatable. But the point is that this does happen. Now, there are ways for you to deal with this, obviously, and that's going to be later in the workshop. However, just know this is true. You're not like if you are wondering about this, if you're dreading about this, okay, is the motion really shallow or am I bad? Statistically, if you go to a competition, you'll have at least one shallow motion. That's, if not two. Like that's just a numbers game fact. The other thing that could happen to you is that sometimes you will face better teams, right? Teams that are just objectively better that can beat you. Or you're going to face reppy teams, right? Like teams that, for example, they won a comp here and there. People like them and they want to give it to them. So let's look at the first. So if that's the easy part. So if you're against a good team that does wow, like they're analyzing their stuff, they're rhetorically pleasant to hear, like they're very good. That's great, because even if you lose, it's a great learning experience for what you can see. And by the way, one of the greatest skills, not only for extensions but debating in general, for you to be able to see for someone to do something in a debate. It could be an argument, it could be a framing, and for you to copy that and to just listen to it, hear it, and be able to replicate it. You may not replicate it to 100%, but you should be able to do this in order to improve generally, because that way you're stocking abilities in this case against reppy teams. So the unfortunate reality is that judges are human beings, and like human beings, judges have certain biases, right? Like that's just the case. And here and there, maybe some judges like certain particular teams, or maybe certain judges don't want to anger particular teams because they don't want the drama. Maybe they are like I don't know, they can cause them problems by giving them bad feedback or stuff like this. So this does happen. This doesn't mean that you can't completely control this process. There are ways for you to do it, and we'll talk about them later, right? But it is something that happens. And here I'd like to say, debating is a lot like gambling or investing in this case. So like when you put money in the stock market, it's gonna go up, then it's gonna go down, then it's gonna go up again. And like the point is that on average it goes up. With gambling, not so much, but it's kind of the same situation. So you're gonna get a situation where there is little to what you can do, and like even if you try to fight back, you may fail. But that's not the point. The point is that you should look at the general long-term trajectory, right? So for example, you may have a goal like, I would like to break it Euros, I would like to break it Worlds, I would like to break it the North American Euros or the Australian Euros or the Asian Euros or the African Euros. I'm not sure what, or the Southern America Euros. I'm not sure how your competitions are called. Sorry, I don't have them memorized, but basically what your major is in your region. And that major may be like a couple of weeks or a couple of months later. So if you get like a bad call, rep call, try to take as much as you can. Stuff like this happens, unfortunately, and you can and continue. And the final thing is maybe some things won't work from the first try. So for example, there's going to be a section about rhetorics into this workshop. Maybe the first time when you try to do this, you're going to feel cringe, right? You're going to feel like, I'm like a clown here standing at my computer trying to scream emotional things and stuff like that. It's possible you get these thoughts. Like I had these same thoughts to begin with, but that doesn't mean that this is not generally the right idea and you're not on the right track. Sometimes you go down. So I think one example that's pretty interesting is that even after I like got good, after I broke open at Worlds and everything, each of the seasons there was at least one debate, right? In all of the prep comms that I did, at least one debate where I had nothing to run, like not even a sentence, because the motion was shallow. I was CO, opening opposition was like a spammer team, and they took everything, right? And at least one time this happened. So that means like if this were like the, like if it were a stock market, the thing that goes like this would be like a down in this particular case. But it doesn't matter because you bounce back up, you still continue, you still learn some things, and yeah. So yeah, so these are, I guess, this is, I guess, the disclaimer. These things that you're feeling, they're perfectly normal. It's perfectly human for you to get like angry at this stuff. I can't lie to you that this doesn't happen. But the point is that you should look at the long-term goal. You should continue doing this, and you should know that like if there are teams that like basically started like off not breaking doing this, so can you. Like if you put in the effort and you do this in how should I say this, in a technical, almost surgeon-like approach. Okay, so that's the first part. Let's get into the second part. So I think something like 7-8 people asked me one very particular question, which is, how do I handle matter burning? Like teams that try to take everything and like spam very fast words. Like this is like LSEA, Naomi, Tin, like all of these people, right? And maybe some other people that also do this particular thing. And this, I also think this question correlates with how do I run a vertical extension. Because if, let's say that team tries to run 4 ideas, and there are 4 ideas in the debate, you necessarily have to run a vertical extension, right? In this particular case. That's, I think these two just are connected. So here are a couple of suggestions, thoughts, solutions, whatever you like to call it. So the first thing is debate commentary. So let's first start with establishing what is debate commentary. Okay, let's say we're debating a motion about interest rates. Okay, so like for example, they gave this motion at Cambridge IV, and no, I think it was Oxford IV, and it's a pretty stock motion. So either we raise or we lower the interest rates. Okay, so when central banks raise the interest rates, that means that the interest rates on future and current loans also increase. So that's just simply how it works. That's the mechanism. You could prove it structurally and likely, but we're not trying to prove the argument here. We're just trying to to reach to the debate commentary part. So that's the mechanism. Then what happens later is, what is the bottom line of this particular thing? The bottom line, by the way, is different from the debate commentary, and you'll see in a moment. The bottom line is, well, people have to now spend more money on their credit, on their loans, on their credits that they have, than what they used to. Because if tomorrow the interest rate is, instead of 1%, 2%, that's 1% that you're paying more on your mortgage, on other loans that you have, etc. So that means that if a person were to have, like, let's say, an excess, like if the person is earning, I don't know, like let's say $4,000, and they raise the interest rate, and he has like a couple of loans, like this most case, what is in America, which is, I guess, the stereotypical example of this particular case. Then what happens is that this person has like a lower amount of money. So it could be $200, it could be $400, something like that. This means that when the person has less disposable income, they face harms. What are these harms? Well, for example, maybe they now can't afford particular type of food. So if they ate meat before, now they have to go to eating vegetables. If, for example, they are, if, for example, they have like something happens to them, like, for example, they break their leg or something like that, they have less savings because they can't save that much, and they're at more risk because they have to pay more to the bank, to the credit. So all of these are impacts. So it goes mechanism, bottom line. So what is the conclusion of the mechanism? What are the harms that face from the conclusion? Okay, and here we reach the debate commentary part, and this is extremely important. The debate commentary is similar to the bottom line because, again, it's some kind of conclusion that we're making, but it's within the realms of what the debate is. So debate commentary here would be, this means that the most vulnerable people who don't have savings, who, for example, work paycheck to paycheck, now cannot pay this particular cash, which means that their standard of living drastically drops. This is the most important group of people because when their standard of living drops, they face the most severe harms because they're now forced to make choices that are bad for them, right? This is the debate commentary part. This is you commenting to the judge, trying to explain to them what is the implication of the analysis that you brought into this particular moment. Now, how will this work in the context of a, like this is how it works in general, like when we're analyzing points, how it works in the context of an extension. In the context of an extension, you need to point to the judge what are the problems that exist in the extension, in the argument of your opening team, so let's say opening government, and how your extension solves these particular problems. Now, why is this super important for you to do? Because otherwise, you leave this to the judge for them to do it, and they could either do it or either not do it in this particular case. But in order for you to make sure that they do it, that they do these particular things, you need to use the debate commentary. Think of it as giving the instruments to the judge to be able to explain the call into this particular, to be able to explain the call to, for example, their panelists or to the debate in general after this is done. So that's how you do the debate commentary in this particular case. And the debate commentary could be many things. It could be what are the problems in their case. It could be how your mechanism is stronger. What holes is your mechanism filling in this case, etc. Now, the important thing here is I see many teams that just go and they explain the point. They either pretend that their opening didn't talk about this at all, or they just don't talk about their opening. They just analyze the point, etc. But then that's bad because you are, like I told you, you're leaving it to the judge. But secondly, it's very hard if it's not concretely or adequately presented. What exactly are the materials? What exactly are you giving to this extension? and how would you comment as to why it fills something up, it's not going to work. So how would this be done in a spammer situation? So let's say they run 4 points. 2 are good, the other 2 are meh. Like you could probably go without those points. They analyze to a large extent the first point, they don't analyze the second point. So in order for us to use debate commentary to beat them, we would need to say, okay, I know OG runs 4 points. They don't actually explain point number 2. Their analysis reaches X moment. So for example, they, like if it's the backlash argument, let's say, they explain to why people get mad, and then the explanation as to what they will actually do after getting mad is not there. So we're going to provide to you this explanation right now, providing the explanation, blah blah blah. Then say, now that this explanation is done, this means that we give to you the critical analysis for this point to work in the debate. And then the question is, what does this then mean for the debate? This is the question that you should also always ask yourself when you're doing debate commentary. So yeah. Now, one more thing to add here. You should also try to add humor to this, or some kind of other persuasive tools. So for example, like the spammy team, that's LCA, right? That's Caito and Ahmed. So if you watch their quarter at Worlds, their CEO is Ateneo, and the whip Toby, he does this very funny thing, which is we explained this not just in better English, but with better analysis. So, and everyone laughs, because it's it's this moment where they actually do give better analysis, because they POIA, they repeat us with better English, but they actually do give more to the argument in this particular case, and you could try different tweaks and tricks to make it more persuasive. Okay, so that's on debate commentary. The second thing is distribution of roles and responsibilities. So you are only one person. You are only one person in a 2-person team, however. When you're one person in a 2-person team, that means that second person can also do something else. So, for example, if you see the draw and you think, based on the draw, that you, for example, know your opening government, your closing government, that opening government is going to be your biggest problem. You tell your teammate, look, sorry for a moment. Lucas, are you letting the people in? Just check.
Yeah, I am. It's just that they dropped out a few times.
Okay, no problem. So yeah, because it popped up. Okay. So going back to the situation. So you have the team in opening government that you know it's going to be a threat. Maybe you faced them before. So yeah. So in this case, you can tell your teammate, look, I'm not going to listen to opening opposition. You deal with opening opposition. What I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to opening government and only opening government. And while opening opposition is talking, I'm going to write our extension and how it either differentiates or it's more important than opening government. And I'm not going to talk about opening opposition at all. And that's perfectly fine, because the whip can respond to all. The whip can also technically differentiate from OG, but it would be best if you do this in the extension, so there is little to no doubt when you do it. So this is strategy that we do most cases with both my Worlds partners. This is what we do. I handled the comparison with our opening, and then they dealt with the bench that's in front of us. Now, ideally, you'd be able to do both, but the point is that you need to, and that actually, let's skip the finding the key mechanism part and go to the prioritization. The point is that you need to prioritize, which brings me to the other thing. And this is super important. Sometimes teams really, 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 really like something that you have came up in your mind during prep. It could be an idea, it could be a response, it could be a new framing, something like that. You really, really want to run this. However, you have only 7 minutes and you'll be wasting your time. So for example, if it's some kind of response to an argument that you really, really, really like you'll feel witty when you give this response to that argument. We're going to talk about responses later also, by the way. But that takes away time from, for example, you explain the impacts of the argument, or you differentiating between you and opening government. Drop it. Leave this thing. You need to prioritize what are the best ways for you to increase your probability of victory, or at least not taking the fourth. So if that includes you, for example, having to drop rebuttal, having to drop framing, having to drop a separate argument altogether, if you think of running more than one extension, do it. Just don't put yourself in a situation where you have too many things in front of you, and you just really, really want to run this. No, like you need to show discipline in these types of moments, and you need to do what you need to do in order to beat your opening government or opening opposition in this case. So yeah, maybe I should have put that after distribution roles and responsibilities. Okay, finding the key mechanism in prep. Usually, an argument has multiple components, right? It has like multiple premises, it has illustrations, it has analysis, it has impacts. It also may have weighing, to be sure that you finish the part. So not just the argument, but why the argument beats something else in the debate. It may have framing. But usually, an argument ties down to one or two very specific mechanisms in order for that argument to be true. Not that the other parts are not that important, are not crucial, they are, but they're not that important compared to this one mechanism or this one thing that you'll be talking about. And I want to give you an example here. So round 5 of Worlds, this year's at Madrid, there was this very, in my opinion, obscure motion. It was about data journalism versus more contextual storytelling journalism, right? So prop defends more data, op defends more storytelling. So if props world is like, let's say 7,000 people died of heart attacks in X region, op will be meet John, who died of whose like relative died of a heart attack, and all of the context behind that. Like that's basically the debate, more or less. And we were closing government, and we had I would say, very good opening government. It was I think Edinburgh A team that we later had in our Octos as well. So it was a solid team. What happened, which was pretty interesting, is that solid team, in their attempts to basically try to run everything and try to burn us, like they even did this thing where this is going to come from us and not closing government, which is apparently like stuff that people do in today's debating age. They forgot one of the most basic pieces of analysis that you need to explain in that round. And that basic piece of analysis is, when something is emotional, it can be manipulative, because you can pick and choose certain way you phrase things, and you can basically play with the person's emotions, right, on a subjective level. So like, let's say if it's this year we lost like 7,000 jobs to migrants, like that, yeah, that affects the person, but it doesn't affect them to the same extent as meet John, who lost his job to migrants, and like how he can't feed his family, he can't be a breadwinner, they face these type of problems, blah blah blah, etc. So not only did they miss this analysis in prime minister, what also happened was opposition, so OO, the leader of op, the main mechanism which they pushed is numbers can be manipulative, right? So they gave for the whole Brexit example, how the real number is actually different, but they wrote, the 360 million. I don't really care that much about British politics, but it was something like that. And in deputy, they also didn't respond to this. So they had the option even in deputy, to respond to this, but they didn't for some reason. I don't know if they like overextended themselves trying to beat us, that they forgot that opening opposition was a threat, but they didn't. They ended up not doing it. So what I ended up doing was, I literally started my speech with this particular thing. Like I had it written down in prep. It's not a very particularly hard piece of analysis. I had it, and I just ended up using it in this situation. There are also other situations where teams sometimes forget the most basic of analysis in order for this to work. So what's the point here? The point here is, and we'll have a section about prep, but if you're able to determine what the key mechanism is, and they either don't explain this key mechanism to that argument, they just say the argument, but they don't explain this key mechanism, or like they explain it, in this very, very fast way, blah, 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 but, without the explanations in the context, you can say, combining what we just said. So with the debate commentary, okay, they said this, and to be fair, like the one thing that I really like, they do have words on this argument. That's the thing that you can play. They do have some kind of words on this argument. This is, by the way, from Kat Janssen from the ESO final in Astana. You can watch it. She was CG, but this requires a more comprehensive explanation in order for this to work. Here's this comprehensive explanation, and insert the key mechanism. Okay. Say the other thing is to listen how the debate plays out, and mainly in particular how teams respond to each other. So maybe, for example, they may have the argument, explained, right, in a very generic way. But for example, if that's opening opposition, opening government may have responded very well to that argument, or closing government may have responded well to that argument. So in extension, you could say, okay, this argument is vulnerable to these attacks. They didn't try to defend this argument from these attacks. So if we respond to these responses and take care of them, then a significant chunk of this particular argument and its success in the debate relies on analysis that we bring. Now, obviously, this is relative, right? Because maybe some judges will just straight up and say, well, yeah, that's true, but I don't think that that response is, I don't think that response is that important that I should credit CEO's response back. That's possible to happen. Obviously, debating is like a game of probabilities and likelihood. Some judges may, some judges may not. But the point is that this is a path to deal with this situation. And don't look at these situations like in abstract. Like maybe they could have missed the key mechanism and not dealt with these responses. So when you combine all of these things together, then maybe the whole picture can be the whole picture together. You can take the argument to be yours. And the final thing is, if everything of this that I explained to you fails, there's always the scope and scale trick. So what is the scope and scale trick? So basically, when a team analyzes an argument, that argument has a certain scope, right? So a certain probability of that action happening. And let's say they could have proven this to, let's say, 30%. They could have done a relatively okay job, or maybe even relatively good job, into explaining why the analysis is enough for them to win. However, it's possible for you to provide, as Toby said in that debate, better analysis, a stronger mechanism, and compare that mechanism, which we'll look more in part 3, to what they said, and explain that it's a bigger likelihood of the impacts occurring. So let me give you an example. In round, and sorry, I'm giving examples with myself, but I can use mostly my personal experience. In round, I think 3 was it in Worlds, with the motion about the common currency between the Southern American countries. We had a very good OO in that round. And they did the normal argument. The normal argument is these countries are economically different. When they are economically different, that means that they require different economic policy in order to basically differentiate themselves and scale the growth. So, for example, if you're an export-based economy, then that means that you are more interested in your currency having less power. So for it to be lower than, let's say, the dollar or the euro or some kind of other currency, so that increases the amount of exports that you have. If you are, let's say, a services-based economy, you would actually want to do the reverse, because you want per the amount of service that you give, the more to charge for said service, basically, in this case. And these countries, it was like Mexico, Peru, Colombia, they they are different. They are not they're not the same, and they gave more reasons to, by the way, than this. This is just the one reason that I have. They also gave reasons about loans, as to why they'll be different. One of them would want like lower rates, other higher, stuff like that. So they were very good. They give multiple reasons, and in fact, it was a pretty tough situation, if I have to be honest. And I was very 50-50 on whether I should try to extend on this vertically, or I should just try to run another idea. So we had one backup idea, which was going to guarantee us the second against the governments. So it was going to be OpSweep. And that part was okay. That part was secure. The real danger was opening opposition in this case. And the one idea, you can explain it in like 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. It's pretty simple. So what I ended up thinking was that the one thing that OO was missing was to explain why their incentives are likely to continue to be different. So in the long, even if they do this in the long term, they will still want to prioritize different things instead of them having a more unified, combined approach. And to be honest, this was also a response that both government teams gave to opening opposition. So it was a bit with the other part, listening to how responses played out. So what ended up happening was the way that we sell this particular mechanism. And by the way, it wasn't like 5 structural reasons. It was one mechanism, which is that countries would like to specialize into particular things. And when they have invested initially into specializing into these particular industries, so let's say cars or producing wine or whatever, they would like to recoup these investments in order to give it to their, basically send a message to their population and get re-elected. So, and changing this would require more reinvesting, which they can't do. So they're likely to stick to these particular industries. So in the long term, they will also want to have these differentiating incentives. So the way that we solved this was, if opening opposition proves to you that this will lead to harms in the next 2 to 5 years, we explain why these harms will continue like in the next 20 or so years, which will impact quantitatively more people. So that's scaling a bit, but this will impact more years. So the scope, right? The scope of the argument is bigger. It will be applied for a longer period of time into this case. The other option is scale, right? To say, okay, with the mechanisms presented by opening opposition, this will apply to the current amount of people, but our mechanism also applies to future people, to newly born, to the kids when they become, if they're 10 today, they'll be 30 in 20 years, and to impact their job opportunities, the country they live, the tax money that they have in this case. So this is the scope or scale trick. This is if all else fails, you can always do this, but also in general, it also works, right? You can use this in combination with the others. So you could, again, if you're against the spammer, you could say, okay, the spammer gave a sentence. You could even use this specific thing, they're spammers, they gave the sentence. We will give to you another sentence. You could make that joke, but we will give you quantitatively more sentences, so that, or to be serious here, we're going to give you another mechanism that's going to impact for either a longer period of time, larger group, has a higher probability of impacting, blah, 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 stuff like that, the scope and the scale. Okay, so this is how you handle the matter burners or spammers. And look, again, this may not always work, right? Or you may not always do it correctly. You may still try, and you may still be pointed in the right direction. And luckily, there's judges with whom you can ask for feedback and ask for advice. But this is more or less the way. one final thing is you shouldn't be scared if a team touches on the argument. Like you still, even if you fail, you still have to try to take that argument. And you could obviously, and look, these teams, they're not like some kind of robots where they can equally distribute the analysis per each argument. Most likely they have one point that's fairly okay developed, fairly well developed. You leave that point and then you continue with vertically extending on the other points in this case. Okay, cool. That's for this part. Let's go to part 3. I hope this answered the spammer question that everyone had. Okay, part 3. Weighing against your opening if you have different arguments. So let's start with something that is very dear to my heart. And that's that sometimes you just have to cut your losses and take a second or third. This could be in many cases. This could be, for example, if the motion is shallow, right? That's and you decide to go hard on rebuttal. This could be, for example, if there is one particularly very strong argument, and after that there aren't that many strong arguments. So let's say there was this motion at LSE Open that I saw about dogs preferring a world where not dogs, animals have human speech and sentient ability. So they're basically humans. And on Gov, like the strongest point here is people not eat that much meat. That's basically. After that, like honestly, the only second thing that I thought is it would be cool if your pet talked to you or something like that. So like in a situation like this, like there isn't much that you can do. And to be fair, the best teams and the teams that I respect the most are honestly not the teams that are going to EPL you, just like pretend your team didn't exist, repeat your case with a more angry language and more with a better accent, but the team that actually goes, okay, we're not going to be able, we won't beat our opening government, we're going to bash the ops in this debate, and we're going to prove one exclusive thing separate to that. Or maybe you could be in the reverse situation where you're closing government, both of the ops are bashing you, and all you have to beat is opening government, and you have to take the third. In this case, that's also a plausible scenario, but this is perfectly fine. The only situation where this is not fine is a final, right? Because on the final, it's winner take all. You're either going to win or you're not going to win. But in the majority of cases, especially if you are in an out round or just a regular round and you're fighting for the second, you should do this. If you want to watch good debates on this, the Macau Tournament of Champions, the two semifinals, are brilliant examples of two teams that just go, we're going to beat the props. We don't care about opening opposition from CO. Another great example is, wait, what was that round? There was a round 5, Milos and Janko on the like Nations League or something like that, where they were CO again. And I guess you could watch me and Nikki's ESL semifinal, where like again it was like it was exactly this situation. So it was a motion about like using a specific tool to spy on people, something like that. And if you prove two things from op, the first being this will be used well and like not that much, so you won't spy on that many people, then most of the harms on gov don't occur. And secondly, you deal with criminals, terrorists, enemy states, all of these actors that you're able to use it, then you're done. That's an easy way through. Like you're just like this, you can go through. And what remains is like some mumbo jumbo. That's how I personally feel about that case from that round. It's literally mumbo jumbo in my opinion. But we were like, okay, all is going through. Let's bash the governments and let's prove mumbo jumbo case, but prove it okay enough to go. And the funny thing was, opening opposition in that debate, they're a good team, but they didn't do it that well to allow them to go clearly. What ended up happening was the panel argued between them and both of the props. Sorry, excuse me, both of the props, whether or not one of the props is beating them. We were like kind of in the sidelines here. just standing. Some people had us first, some people had us second, but we were clearly through, thank God. But yeah, that's a good example. So the point is that sometimes you just have to do it, and it doesn't really matter. Like you're not going, like there isn't a team in history to have gone to Euros and Worlds and with full 9 firsts. That's just statistically impossible. One team is going to beat you here and there. So yeah, okay. So after we got that out of the way, weighing or differentiating should be done either in the beginning, so asking the question what is needed, or after the extension is proven in the round, so what has been given. But this should be never in the middle. Never, you should never do this in the middle. You should never analyze a point and then try to differentiate with the other team, because this just creates chaos in your speech and it confuses the judge. So you should either stand up, say, this is our extension. I'm going to prove the extension, right? And again, look, we're not looking at vertical extensions. We're looking when we have different extensions. Say, this is the extension, we're going to prove it, proceed to prove it. You know, it could take 4 or 5 minutes, depending on what the argument is. And then explain, we've given you this extension. This is stronger than opening government's arguments because, and we'll get to the technicalities of this thing, but that's the case. The other option is in the beginning to point to a problem that opening government may have and to explain what is required in order for that problem to be dealt with. Now, again, this could be used for vertical extensions, but it also could be used to differentiate other extensions as well. So, for example, there was this debate about internationalization of social movements. And basically, the way this worked was that governments said, well, when social movements are internationalized, local social movements in the developing world, so let's say a gay rights movement in, I don't know, Bangladesh or India or Bulgaria, they would prioritize things that are not of local concerns. So, for example, let's say domestic abuse is a huge issue in Bulgaria, but they would prioritize something that they perceive is a big issue. So let's say gender pay gap, right? Because in the West and in the movies and like popular culture, we know gender pay gap big issue. But for example, in Bulgaria, gender pay gap is not a big issue. Like because of communism, women are fair, like I won't say 100%, but fairly almost equally paid as men in this particular case. But even if that's not the case, the harm of, for example, domestic abuse is way bigger than that. But because, you know, this person like communicates with international people, goes to like forums and stuff like that, they would care about this. So the way that OP responded to this argument was to say, okay, look, but they do have incentives to care about this. You know, they care about the success of the movement. They care about attracting people. They care about, for example, you know, selling their message, blah, blah, blah. So what I ended up doing was, here are all of the reasons that all list and POI another reason, which means that opening government's mechanism, you know, to be completely honest, sometimes activates, sometimes doesn't activate. You can remember this, by the way. Like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, which means that the probability of their mechanism working is not particularly true. And I said, what you need, so you know what is needed, is a mechanism that activates in, if not all, most situations. So the mechanisms that we thought is when social movements internationalize, they do a lot of bullshit. Basically, they have like stupid meetings at random times. They are committed to some projects that are some programs. Like we used a lot of analogy with Euros and Council. You know, so for example, we have to go to council, we have to discuss some administrative stuff, which tire people and take away your capacity as a social movement to actually do the things that you need to do. So in this debate, we ended up taking a third, and OG ended up taking a fourth. By the way, very good team. Like it was very strong team. But the point was that despite the result, this worked, this differentiation, because the judge knew at the very start how our material is different from theirs and how our material fits into what is needed, not for their case, but for the debate in general, in this particular case. Yeah, okay, I hope that was clear. It was very specific example. Yeah, so the question you always need to ask yourself is, why does this beat X team? So in this case, your opening team. And that's the thing with extensions. You can't just like run a random extension, you know, and like hope that things are gonna get better, right? Like you're going to win. Like it has to be some kind of relatively good extension. Now, obviously, the situation where this doesn't apply is, you know, when you're cutting your losses and you're going for the second, which is fine. Respect for doing that. But in the normal situation, you have to run not the random obscure Marxist extension or the random obscure extension that deals with a very small group of people. It needs to be kind of like within the debate in this case. So when you ask yourself, why does this beat X team? There must be some kind of explanation that is given. And this explanation we're going to talk a bit more. But one more thing to this is that you should also have a separate piece of paper for your opening, right? So when you go out, you need to have a paper like what they wrote and how you're going to weigh against these points that they have into this particular case. You should always treat them different. You may have to have two pieces of paper. By the way, there was this very specific question: how do I deal with debates when deputies change the debate? So if they have a radical shift in strategy, which is also a possibility. I didn't like add a lot of this because the answer is very simple. You just treat it as a second prime minister speech, right? You have to see, okay, what did they prove? What did they actually explain? I know it's a bit confusing, but more or less this is the situation, and this is how you make you deal with this sort of thing. So have a separate piece of paper and ask yourself the question: why does this beat X team? And there are two ways you could go about this. The first way you could go is with standard impact weighing, either on vulnerability, numbers, or obligations. So vulnerability. If you have a very like maybe small, but it may not be small in cases, but very vulnerable group. So let's say the poor, or let's say, you know, some kind of minority groups, or let's say some kind of people that actually like are vulnerable. You can use this as a reason as to why you are beating them. So if their extension, either they don't specify which group of people they're talking about, or maybe the group of people isn't as vulnerable as this, you can use this as a comparative. One note here. Please, 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 please do not just say this as a catchphrase, and do not say this in every round. Not all rounds have to be about the most vulnerable minority, for the very simple reason that they are minorities, right? Like they're a small group of people. It is perfectly legitimate strategy for you to win the debate with talking about the most group of people or the widest group of people possible, even if the harms aren't that big to them in this particular case. So what I mean to say is, if you're going to run this, actually run it. Actually give reasons as to why someone is vulnerable and what does that mean for the debate, instead of just, you know, saying it in this sort of case. The second strategy is with numbers. So your extension may apply to a wider pool of people. And, you know, you could say something along the lines of, because, you know, we're all equal moral actors, we shouldn't, and we can't, you know, prioritize one group over the other because of, you know, it's arbitrary circumstances. We should care just about what brings the biggest amount of good to the biggest amount of people. And finally, due to like stuff like obligations. So even if the group is small, even if they're not particularly vulnerable group, we should still have obligations based upon this. So one idea here, this isn't necessarily tied to emotion, but we would probably all agree that women with let's say a good financial situation, right? Like let's say they have a lot of savings, a good family, even like they for example, they're well with their father, their mother and father, and their husband, they should still receive maternity leave, right? Like even if this is not something that would necessarily be the most utilitarian thing, right? Because they could technically go about they could technically go about their lives without receiving this maternity leave money. like they would have the savings and this sort of thing, and maybe we could give this money to someone who's very, very poor. Like we have agreed that as a society, because they are taking this extremely important function about, you know, giving birth to children, all of the negative stuff that come about this, that we should give them compensation based upon maternity leave in this type of case. So this is like, I'm not saying this is the most perfect example to like explain this sort of thing. I'm not even sure if this is going to be in a debate when you have, but it's a way to show you that even if this group is utilitarianly well off, we may have other obligations that are important to them. Yeah, so this is how you do impact weighing. So basically why our impact more important than their impact. The other way to do it is mechanistic weighing. So here you need to look, here you need to track, and you need to be very careful. So what are the burdens? Is, for example, their analysis symmetric? What are the proximity of incentives? Ability? So the general question you're asking here is on basically on the probability of something, right? Because mechanisms, or the mechanism given, is basically what is the probability of the impact to happen. That's the case. So let's look at each and every one of them. So let's say, for example, burdens. There are two options here. Option one, you could say that they're picking a extremely high burden argument, something that's like, you know, usually what people do this is they do this in social movements debates, where they like to use the word, this will lead to change. This is what people say. Okay, what does change mean? Are you going to change policy? Are you going to change the minds of people? Like, what exactly is this sort of thing that you're trying to explain here? And then ask yourself, okay, you have a very, very high burden to prove to me that this is like something that's likely to happen. Or like usually in debates about elections, right? Like the whole debate about, oh, is Trump going to be reelected or not, and stuff like that. Like, you could easily say, look, there are many variables that exist within an election, and it's hard for you to determine if X person is going to win or Y person is going to win. Just think about the fact that most likely Donald Trump would have been reelected if the coronavirus hadn't happened. Like, if you think about, he like had a very good economy in that particular moment, and the average person wasn't like very bad towards him. The reason the Democrats most likely won was due to the COVID vaccines, and there was like not COVID vaccines, but COVID pandemic, and there was no way for us to know that the pandemic would happen. Like, if you watch debates in 2018 and 2019, where people speculated all types of stuff, no one could have predicted this. So yeah, basically the way you use burdens is to say you have either a very high burden or a burden that's impossible for you to meet. Like, you cannot comprehensively tell me this to be a case. The other option is if their analysis is symmetric. So here's my favorite moment within this workshop. So there is this very good team, Sydney A, right, from the institution Sydney. You know, they won them. If you go to Wikipedia and you write World Universities Debating Championship, they have like 7 victories. They have won the most WDCs throughout the years. And you know, we're against the in the semi-final at Worlds, we're against the A team of Sydney. It was the motion about this house regrets the prominence of liberal bias in academia and universities. And basically, the case that they ran, they were opening government, we were closing government, was that people doubt academia and doubt scientific research because it's politicized in the direction of the left. That's the case that they ran. They never explain why this changes. Like, why in an alternative world where there is no left-wing bias, you will make the average Joe understand, like, believe in climate change and not believe that this is a hoax, like in their perspective. And the thing with their particular mechanism was about how politicians talk about this stuff. And honestly, this is a super symmetrical argument, because if you're receiving money from oil companies as a Republican politician, right? These are your lobbyists, the same way as the Democrats are receiving money from their lobbyists, then it doesn't matter if the university is liberal or biased or not, you will always deny climate change because that's on your agenda. So what we thought of the place where there is an asymmetry, there is a change, there is something happening is in terms of the people who go through the universities. And if they have like some kind of right-wing predispositions, like they could be center-right, for example, when they go inside and they can speak out freely, when it's liberally biased, then they're more likely to be susceptible to right-wing rhetoric. So this was a very easy situation. And again, I didn't honestly expect it because I thought, okay, this would have been a strong team. But honestly, they a strong team that went in for a very weak case that falls down to basic logic. But the point of this example is that you can honestly listen to what people are saying and ask yourself, okay, but is this not symmetric, right? Does this change? Do they actually explain if this changes, etc.? Yeah. So this is both of these cases, by the way, they're kind of if a team screws up. Let's look at a team does this well. So like maybe both of you could be going for the same impact, but the mechanism in the argument could be about different incentives, right? So I guess this is kind of in the range of vertical extensions as well, but it kind of fits in here. So because the mechanism, it has two parts: incentive and ability of the actors in place. So the more proximate an incentive is, right? So let's say, for example, your proximate incentive would be people around you, your commitments to life, like your university, maybe your job, and other external incentives, maybe to wider society and how people. So you could do a weighing as to say our incentive is more proximate to the actor in question, which means that we prove a bigger likelihood of X thing happening. Or maybe, for example, they may prove incentive, but they don't prove ability, right? So why would the actor be able to do X thing into this particular case, which you can also add. Okay, so that's how mechanistic weighing. So explaining why weighing the mechanism, the stuff that you bring mechanistically, why it's more stronger than the stuff that they bring in opening. There was this question about what exactly is breaking the deadlock. I assume this jargon isn't like accessible to everyone, so I'll answer it here. So basically, breaking the deadlock is this jargon where you claim that let's say opening government gives an argument, opening opposition gives an argument, and somehow these two arguments, they can't be resolved, right? In 99% of the situation, this is a lie. Like there is probably an obvious victor there in the debate. So either OG or OO win in this case. Very rarely is it that hard for you to determine this sort of thing. So the deadlock presumes that like you can't decide which is the case. So the better thing is to say we will resolve the clash for our side, which means basically, or we will win the clash for our side. So basically saying what opening government did, we will do better, or we'll actually do in order for this to be won. And that way you are not within the parameters of there actually being a deadlock in the debate. So yeah, and the way you do this is basically with analysis and impacting and weighing, just saying we'll prove probability, we'll prove why it's important, we'll prove why it's more important than what opening opposition presents you. So basically everything that we talked about in this case. It's persuasion tool. Maybe some judges, when you tell them we will break the deadlock on top half, they're like, oh yeah, okay, I understand this language. Some judges are honestly triggered by this. So maybe saying we'll resolve the clash on the top half in our favor is maybe a bit better Jedi mind tricks that you could pull. Okay, so part 4, how to prep. Yeah. So the first thing, most importantly, keep calm. That's the most important thing. Like you have time. If you think about it, especially if you're CO, you have almost an hour, right, where you can develop the case. So keep calm, right? It's not as if you're top half and you're having to speak right off the bat. In the first 5 to 6 minutes, try to generate as many ideas as possible. Try to generate at least 6 ideas. Obviously, the thing that's excluded here is shallow motions, which we're going to talk about later down. So if the motion is shallow, there are one or two ideas. That's a whole other can of worms. We're going to talk about that later. But try to at least have 6 ideas, because the more ideas you have, the better. If you're closing, if you're going to the debate with one idea, it's highly likely, one or two ideas, it's highly likely your opening team is going to take those ideas. After that, identify what are the key burdens of each argument and what is the general reason or explanation for said burden. So when you think of the argument, okay, these are the ideas, what burdens do we have to meet? So these are just questions. And you just go about them. You say, okay, this is the first burden, this is the second burden, this is the third burden. Usually there are 3 burdens. They're not more than 3, maybe sometimes 4. And when you do this, when you write them down as questions, just ask yourself, okay, which of these burdens is the most important one? Well, I think this one is. Then ask yourself, what is the explanation that needs to be given here in order for the average informed voter to buy this? So this is again in the key mechanism part, right? When you ask yourself, so what is the key mechanism in this particular case? And you don't have to write this down as if you're doing a speech. No, you just have to write it down for you to remember and understand it. So yeah, that's more or less it. Then you need to prioritize the ideas, like in the final minutes, like let's say 30 minutes. Let's say, oh, you ask your partner, okay, out of these 5 ideas, which one should we go first? And you could prioritize them either based on their impact. So let's say what is the highest likelihood of you to get a victory, or prioritize them based upon okay, so let's say OG will take this idea. We have the other 4. Out of these 4, this one seems to be the most legit, right? That's more or less how you do it. And then you should develop the idea within the debate while listening, right? While listening and tracking what other people are saying. Now, it's super important for you to get this particular skill. Like this is basically, I think this is what separates people who are like, I won't use the word novices, but I can't think of another word, novices, from people who are experts in debating. Because I think many people struggle with the idea of being able to listen to a debate and actually write down the extension and develop it. You shouldn't develop the extension in prep as if you're going to do a prime minister speech, because there's a high likelihood of the team taking that idea. What you should do is you should give bits and pieces of analysis to each idea, and then when you go into the debate, try to develop the idea as fast as possible. And if they take that idea too, you can always bounce back on the other 3 ideas that you have. And again, the point with dropping, right? You don't have to run everything. If something isn't necessary, you can drop that point in this case. By the way, there also could be a situation where opening governments forgets the most basic idea, like I told you with that, and you could still run that as well. Okay. Here's the exercise. Exercise for this is to watch a debate, write a case, then listen again, write a case while listening, and then listen again to see what you got in terms of writing. So yeah. How to generate ideas? Usually there are things like new angles of an argument, new groups, new rebuttal, new framing. So new angles, for example, there was a debate about a group of countries to form a country together collectively, and I was closing government in this debate, and what I thought of momentarily is, okay, well, the 2 things that they're going to think about is economics and politics. Like they're going to say, like when the country is bigger together and they're bigger, they're going to have bigger economy, bigger trade deals, collective bargaining, all of these type of things. Then something about political accountability, something like this, blah blah blah. That's going to be the OG. Then I was thinking, okay, what I asked myself, what do states do? And then I thought, well, they do war, right? Sometimes. And then I thought, okay, maybe this idea is a bit far-fetched. But then I thought to myself, I asked myself, okay, do these countries have some likelihood to go to war with either each other or countries around them? And then I analyzed, well, maybe, for example, external shocks could happen, like famines, like maybe, changing of supply chains that lead to poverty and these type of things, and maybe people that really actually take up arms and do this. Maybe they're highly nationalistic also and do this. And then I thought when they're collectively all together, they have accountability mechanisms between each other, because if now one country picks a fight with another country, the other 6 countries within the union has an incentive to say, no, you're not going to do that in this case. And we ended up going through with this idea, even though in the first place it looked totally crazy, but it ended up working. So think about new angles by asking yourself the basic questions to, okay, this is a debate about states. What do states do? This is a debate about feminism. What does the feminist movement do? And unfortunately, it's not like, well, actually, fortunately, it's not like rocket science. It's just, you just need to do it enough times in order for the ideas to come to you fast, and then you can think about some other ideas. Yeah, okay. Moving on to shallow motions. Okay, so here are a couple of suggestions on shallow motions. Number one, go hard on rebuttal. We're going to have a section on responses in just a bit, but really, if like push comes to shove, if you think there is one or two ideas, just think of what are the ideas that exist on op and just respond the hell out of them. Think of as many responses as possible. If you have to do extension and whip speech of only responses, that increases the chance of you getting a third or a second even. Again, asking yourself the question around what are the key characterizations, the key mechanisms after you have the responses. So maybe there is a chance that they may not explain it and you could save yourself. There is such a chance. Maybe it's not that likely, but it's there. So then there is this third thing that I would not advise you to have unless you're specifically within a situation where you have a shallow motion. That's having a backup explanation. A backup explanation is similar to an EPL extension, except you are not trying to EPL extend it, so repeat it in better English, but you're actually trying to dive deeper within the analysis itself, even though this may not be necessary. So let me give you an example. There was this debate at Korea Worlds, round 5, I think. It was about basically startups focusing on getting market share, and us regretting this, like trying to get as much market share as possible. And here the obvious gov here is when they try to do this, invest all of their money into getting market share, many companies just fail and bankrupt and don't go away. So the problem here is that the mechanism is literally explained in like a couple of sentences. That's when companies are focused on getting market share, they have excess spending that they're going to give, which would otherwise go for example, developing their product more, or them having a financial buffer in order to pay their costs and these type of things. So they end up failing. This is the whole analysis. It's not super complex. The backup was, okay, let's illustrate this more. What do companies have? They have fixed costs, right? So they have, for example, taxes, loans. They have, for example, utilities and stuff like that. Then they also have variable costs. So for example, in order for them to expand their market share, what does this mean? This means, for example, they'll have to have a bigger marketing budget. And this is all companies together having the marketing budget. So overall, you're spending on this. You're spending on stuff like flyers, social media ads, stuff that doesn't necessarily bring value, but like is a money waster in order for you to try to get as much market share as possible because of the game theory. Because if you don't get it, the other guy may get it. This is in a way saying the exact same thing, right? But with more words, basically, and more examples. So what ended up happening in that round was that opening government did not run the basic mechanism. I don't know, like teams just think that this stuff is like this. It's just understandable, but it's not. They ended up taking the fourth in the round, or maybe the third. I don't remember. We ended up taking the first, and actually the additional explanation helped the judge in that round explain the call more, because we seemed as if we're explaining this better without necessarily explaining it better, at least in my opinion. Maybe someone would say that this is a far better explanation than the first one, but in any case, it's a far deeper explanation. So trying to take the key mechanism and trying to have backup explanations of the key mechanism also helps with shallow motions. And finally, it's not always about the mechanism, right? Maybe there could be other parts of the argument, more framing, more impacting, more stuff like that. Even if a team takes the most basic mechanism, there is a way for you to give additions to this mechanism that maybe in combination with the go hard on rebuttal part, like let's say maybe give weighing as an extension. Like you could say, OG never weighed their claims against O. We're going to do that instead of them. Plus, we're going to rebuttal O. Maybe give us a second. Like this works in this type of cases. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it's ideal, but it is a strategy. Okay, then we go to responses. Now, something very important. You don't have to give random responses to random things, right? No one is like putting a gun to your head and like telling you, okay, you when your extension, you should necessarily respond. No, you don't have to respond, right? Especially if it's just a random response to a random thing. Your main priority is to deliver the debate winning extension. This is what you are focused on. Anything else, it isn't that important. The question you need to ask yourself is, how does the response further our chances of victory? So if you're just responding to a random example or random line of analysis that was given from opening opposition, is that really furthering your chance of victory? If you're responding to the heart of their argument and opening government isn't responding to the heart of their argument, then yes, that's good. That's good. That's a good response that you need to have. But then there's another question. Is this a response that can be left to the whip, right? Instead of you, for example, impacting your extension more, or maybe giving a piece of framing that helps you, or maybe giving another mechanism to insulate you from this. Like, this is the question, because if you can leave the response to the whip and the whip can stand up and give the response, then you should probably do that. You shouldn't necessarily give that response to there. So these are basically checks that you could do. Now, the only thing that's like, in my opinion, not true for this is if there is any implicit or explicit material that attacks our case. So if, for example, they have analyzed with their case and that's attacking us, right? Like if that's stopping, if their case being true stops our case from being true, then you should respond to their case. Or maybe they could have some direct preemptive rebuttal. In this case, in the process of analyzing the extension, you should also do this. Now, something very important, you should keep these two processes separate. So when you prove the extension with the analysis, you should then say, okay, there are responses, either explicit or explicit, coming from opening opposition. I'm going to deal with them now. So the first is this, blah, blah, blah. This isn't true because blah, 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 in this case. Yeah, so you should deal with these explicit and explicit responses, because if you don't deal them with extension, maybe there's a chance that they won't hear this in the whip. So this is something that I would prioritize. And finally, if possible, just leave the responses in the end. Why would you waste your most valuable time that the judge listens to? So in the beginning, if there isn't a particular reason for you to start with the responses, why don't you just start with the case? So the judge listens, writes it down, and leave the responses to the end. Yeah. Okay, and we reached the final part here, which is style, rhetorics, and energy. Okay, the first thing that you need to know, just the disclaimer. I know British parliamentary debating is not a format where we account for style. That's true. There isn't like in world schools where you give style points. However, this is a human game. We're between humans. So style, rhetorics, energy, all these things to a certain extent impact what is the decision, what is the, and how it will impact. So you're focusing on them to a certain extent, or even maybe a bigger extent, will help you out. So the first thing that you need to understand is that you're playing a role. You're given a role based on the motion. So you could be a socialist, you could be an environmentalist, you could be a freedom fighter, you could even be a right winger sometimes. Maybe you could be. So this is to a large extent theatrics, right? And you are, if you think about it, you're giving a show to a judge, right? In this case. Now, I'm not saying you to become a full out actor or something like that, but what I'm saying is a person who just stands up and say, Madam Chair, we're going to give you this extension today, or we're going to have 3 points of extension, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure that if that's a particularly interesting and compelling thing to watch. Whereas someone who, for example, tries to ramp up the rhetorics, they themselves project themselves as being in this particular role. That creates like energy, adrenaline within the debate and within the judge, and makes the judge focus to listen to you. Which brings to the second thing, which the judge is a person, and you need to energize them to make them want to give it to you. You know, so if you watch the semifinal where we're debating against left-wing bias in academia, there is a reason why I started my speech with that whole thing, because I wanted to convey the message that we are here to win. Like, this is not, we're not playing games. I could have very easily said, we're going to bring you 2 points today. One, why liberalism bad. Two, why the right wing becomes good. No, like, I wanted to convey the energy in order to make them want to give it to them, to make it as if it's good for them to listen to me in this sort of case. And look, I know it's hard, right? Like, it's especially in the beginning to try it, but you need to try this type of thing. You need to ramp up the rhetorics. You need to ramp up the style. Yeah. And the most important thing is, when you go inside the debate, there is already like some kind of doubt to what you're going to say, right? Because there's already been a debate, there are already some arguments. So the way that you differentiate this is by like basically shocking them, right? In order to be, okay, I'm going to listen to this. And if you think about it, some of the best extension speeches, right, have this aha moment with them, right? Where you go, aha, okay, I see where this is going. If you do this, then you may in fact win. Yes, aha, okay, so you change the debate in this sort of case. So that's how you're energizing the thing. So the final thing is, there was a question about principles. So this is not a workshop about principled arguments. I don't plan on making it one. If you have any questions about this, obviously you can answer. But what I will say about principles is the following. A principle argument is an argument that means that even if outcomes are in the other direction, right? Even if utilitarian, it makes sense to go that way, we should go the other way, because that's simply the right thing to do. If you remember the example with the maternity, right? Even if the woman would be like privileged, have a good life, because like she's doing this function in society, which is extremely important, we need to give some kind of recourse, some kind of repercussions, which is why we give them the maternity. We principally owe them this particular this specific and this particular thing. Another example would be, the trolley problem, where you can't pull the lever because you're going to murder someone, and that's in generally bad. The point is, there is a very specific burden that needs to be met with the principal argument, is that even if outcomes are in the other direction, we should still do this in general because of moral reasons. Yeah. Now, this is a very high burden to meet. That's why in most cases, principles actually shouldn't be run. There are very specific situations where principles need to be run. So you need to prep them for like 10% of the motions, but in general, they're not like that super debate winning arguments, at least in my opinion. Maybe some other people would disagree with me on this. But something that's very important is, when you are running a principle, and especially if you're running a principle from extension, you need to ramp up the rhetorics. You need to pick and choose the example, because think about it. You are trying to make a human being make a fundamentally illogical choice, because the logic is pointing in the direction of most outcomes. You need to play more with their emotions, in what emotionally would make them want to make this particular choice or not. So that's why when you're going to use them in extension, you need to increase the rhetorics. You can't just say we're going to follow the principal arguments that's like this. No, you need to make it more theatrical and more energizing in this sort of case. Okay, so to wrap it up, this is more or less what you need to do in order to get better in extensions. And there is like, this is basically the theory, and you just need to actually just start practicing and doing it. Now, each and every person has their own like schedule and stuff. But yeah, like, you should try to find time for this. Okay, we can stop sharing now. If anyone has any questions in the chat, you can send them, and I can answer them. Hold on, let me open it up. Yep, the doc will be shared and the recording will be shared. You can send it in the chat. If you have a questions on any other topic that's not an extension, you can also send it. Epistemically stalled both by the ethical truths. I don't know what this means. How to overcome being epistemically stonewalled by the ethical truths. No, really, I don't know what this means. This how to overcome it? Just say this means nothing. Like this is made up language. The average informed voter does not understand what this means. But just okay. In general, how do you deal with this word salad bullshit? Right, like when you're debating teams that are use very specific words, very particular words, you know. Like there was this one debate where we were debating a motion about Iran, something like that, and we were CG and CO said that the motion will lead to stochastic violence. And Alec, my teammate, then just stood up in the beginning of his speech and said, panel, I'm not sure if stochastic violence is different from the regular violence. It's probably the same as the regular violence. You know, that's how you make fun of this. You need to point to this is some kind of magic trick that exists into this sort of thing. The other thing is just to say that the fact that you are putting extra smart sounding words does not constitute an argument. An argument needs to have logic within it, not just some random words in this sort of case. So make fun of it and point to the judge that it's and just point to the judge that it's wrong. How do you prove a magic trick to an average Joe? I see 5 smile emoji. I'll assume that this is not a serious question because I don't know what it means. Okay. Okay, guys. I'll feel free to ask any questions. We have 18 more minutes per schedule. Okay. Is there any way to get better at using rhetorics from extension, especially with principles? I have the voice of a dying animal. So for the voice, I'm not an expert, obviously. Maybe there could some helpful YouTube videos on this. No, for real, I know that there's some tricks to make the voice sound maybe more deeper and stuff like that. If you really, really want to, you can give that a try. I haven't met a debater to actually do this, at least in the current era. Maybe in the past, they have done stuff like this. In terms of getting better and using rhetorics, so the first thing is you need to start with the basics. The basics is tone, right? Most debaters who stand up and just speak in this monotone tone of no 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 don't do this. Actually try to increase the pitch of your voice, especially when you're talking about impacts, right? The other thing is speed. By the way, if you're thinking of doing this fast talking, don't do it, especially if you're ESL. Try to speak at a fairly normal rate. That's more effective in this sort of case. It's not so much about putting in as much of the words as possible to create a word salad as much as these words actually to make some kind of sense, you know? So that's the second thing. So take pauses, take stops. That also really helps with the persuasiveness. The other thing is humor. Also, if you consistently in debates crack a joke or two, now obviously don't crack joke on serious motion, but crack a joke or two, people actually start enjoy listening to your speeches and enjoy seeing what you do in this type of thing. And finally, examples also work into these type of things, play a lot of work, and that's mostly it. With the principles, the examples and the analogies are the bread and butter for principles. So that's more or less it. Honestly, if you do these things, that's more or less it. You could always try to do some expert level rhetoric stuff, but that's good enough. The point is also sorry, the Apple Watch activated. The point is also to have the rhetorics, the examples, and the analysis together, so that you are able to maximize that. I hope that answers your question. Okay, let's see what else. Is there a way to keep calm and collected during debates using smart timing? I'm sorry, I'm not sure what smart timing means. In general, you don't necessarily have to be super calm. Like there should be some kind of adrenaline within you, something to push you. But like I guess the normal thing is like this is a game. It's not life or death. So you shouldn't like die over it or something like that. Like there are, you probably have other pragmatic things in your life as well, like probably your university, your job, your family, your friends. So having those things as an anchor really does help to stabilize. Okay, I had a question that you kind of answered in the last part, but to push it a bit further. If you're CG and you have asked kick-ass principle case, but everyone else talks consequence and arguments exclusively, do you push it anyway and try to show that their impacts depend on likelihood, mechanization, therefore contingent on principle? Drop it. So drop it or try to think of something practical untouched by OG. It really depends on what time this, in terms of the debate, this plays out. If you're talking to me in deputy leader of opposition 2 minutes into their speech, you're not going to make a case in 5 minutes. You may not even be able to make a case in the leader of opposition. So I would strongly advise, especially if you're new, to not do something this risky and drop the entire case after that moment. So after a certain moment, it's do or die. It's that case or nothing, and that's just the unfortunate reality of things. As for the consequentialist and principle things, I don't think there is an easy way to prove that the consequentialist argument is contingent on a principle. Then usually it's the reverse, actually. So think about it this way: whenever we run arguments, we have a moral obligation for X group, right? This sentence implies that restitution towards this moral obligation is the thing that we should care about. 99% of the situations, restitution is a practical thing, right? So if like think about it this way: if I come to you and like hit you, and you feel pain, and like the way that I'm going to give you a restitution would be if I usually give you some kind of money, or if I go to prison to experience similar or a bit more levels of pain into this case. So that's practical. That's not principle. So that's what I mean with these principles. You really have to be careful. And in many cases, I wouldn't even go into that direction. Like for just for context, for Worlds, we didn't run a single principle, not once. So yeah. Okay, moving on to the other questions. What are some suggestions for deep mentions? I'm not a matter burning style person. When our opening half run most important straightforward arguments, it's really hard to do an extension. But again, look, we did cover this. So if you're going into the debate with so first let's start with the most basic thing. If it's a motion where there's one good idea and the other ideas are bullshit, it happens. You go for the second. If you go into the prep with 2 ideas, that means that you have a problem with generating ideas. That means that you and your partner need to get a couple of motions, sit down, and just think of as many ideas as possible. They don't necessarily have to be deep motions. But where do you find the motions? So there is on Facebook, there is this link called Global Debating Spreadsheet where the past tournaments are there, and you can hold on. Let me send this link. Maybe that will be practical. Global Debating Spreadsheet, and in that spreadsheet you can look at the you can basically look at the previous competitions tabs. You can look at the motions, and also like in the motion tab you can kind of determine what is the like depth. Like if it's shallow, it will be in the statistics. If it's not, it won't be. So yeah, here you go. How do you weigh a pragmatic material in an extension, especially when you're opening run the principle, vice versa? Oh, if it's a principal, it's very easy. If your opening team runs a principal, statistically they're not going to run it properly. Oh, sorry, I didn't send the link to everyone. Here you go. Okay. Statistically, they're not going to run it properly. Statistically, it's going to be something along the lines of we have obligation to X thing, and you can point out, okay, this is contingent on outcomes. If we prove the outcomes, we're upholding their principle. And that's simple as that. Like that's 99% of the situations. Secondly, the one thing that you can point out is moral obligations are usually relative, right? We agree that killing is bad, but we also agree that killing in self-defense can be acceptable, right? If someone is coming to take your life and the only way for you to stop them in that situation is for you to kill them, that's okay. I think this is not that scandalous of an opinion to say. But what I'm trying to list, or here, like we could say, stealing is bad, but still, if you're fucking starving and you have no other option in your life, it's acceptable. That's why we have like mitigatory circumstances in sentencing, right? We don't just give a straight thing. So just pointing out, if they give a principle, that principle needs to be absolute. There is very rarely an absolute principle. And you could easily point out, and this isn't a stab, by the way. It's not for you to say, it's just for you to point out if they don't prove to you this in absolutes, then that means that then this principle does not hold water. You can remember these words. This principle does not hold water. What was I about to say other than that? In general, it's weighing up pragmatic material. We had the two sections, So if we're talking about impacts, scale, vulnerability, number of people. If we're talking about the mechanisms, basically what's the likelihood? Are there problems with the openings mechanism? Are there burdens too high to find? Are there some responses that they haven't dealt with that destroy their case? Or is our mechanism just in general stronger than theirs? So are there more proximate incentives? Is there a lower burden of it being proven? Like there are many ways for you to go about these particular things. All of this, by the way, you get better at it with judging. That's just the way it is. Okay. Any suggestion where to look up intuition pump analogies? Any relevant workshop docs? Honestly, no. Like, look, I'm not the like principal guy. I hate these arguments. And also, to be fair, when I'm judging, I don't buy them. Like very rarely have I ever gone, yes, this principle definitely wins the debate outright. So I'll make a general research comment. So let's say there are like different types of motions. There's like economic motions, there's politics motions, social movements, societal narratives, technology, international relations, even specific things. China, Russia, USA, like India, Southeast Asia. All of these things are like very different. And within them, there are also intersections. So like within economics, like there's monetary policy, fiscal policy, taxes, development, macroeconomics, stuff like this. Like there are certain things. So what I would advise you is, and this, by the way, could help you in general, not just about debating, but let's say you don't understand the topic. Like there are three topics that I'm very bad at: law topics, media topics, and no, I guess these two. Yeah, and social media topics. Like these are I guess media and social media could be the same. These motions, I hate them, honestly. So what I end up doing is just like I took one weekend, and I just like read a bunch of stuff on these type of things. So you don't need to do something super complex. You can just do a Google search, and just read, go through the information, read about it as much as you can. Like, and that way you can systemize it. Like for example, you could have like a dictionary. You like not a don't think about it as like a real dictionary, but like your personal dictionary. So let's say if there's something like just war theory, or I don't know, like humanitarian canal, was that it where like during a war zone people can go. Civilians can be evacuated, like stuff like this. And just pick a specific topic and really just take the next 48 hours, the 2 days to read on that, topic. Now, it could be a weekend. It could be very, 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 very useful. You don't need to have super deep understanding about these topics, because in the end of the day, you're doing a 7-minute speech, but it will help you, and that's all it takes. So that would be my general research thing that I would suppose. Is there a way to avoid a situation where we sound uncomparative? Yes, don't just be comparative. The question that you should ask yourself is the analysis that I am giving changing in the motion? Because look, any motion has a change, right? Something to change. Because if the motion, let's start with something basic. If the motion is this house would legalize weed, marijuana, like there is status quo world where weed is illegal, alternative world where weed is legal. Prop things current world bad, other world good. All things current world good, other world bad. That's more or less it. So argument may be this will lead to less black market. And the argument may go along the lines of when weed is legalized and there are normal alternatives for you to buy it from, majority of consumers will like to go to these instead of working with dealers. That's a comparative argument. And where usually people go into sounding uncomparative is where they think that there is more to it, where they think there's, like, for example, more reasons, more stuff. But honestly, that's just it. And you don't need to do more than that. The other way where people usually shoot themselves in the leg is when they analyze the problem too much, and they think that that's something good. But when you analyze the problem too much, you're lowering the solution aspect of this. So if you think of more reasons as to why a problem is a problem, and these reasons don't change within the motion, then that's actually a point for op, because op can argue that the extent of your change is low, but the extent of their change is not, in this sort of case. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Okay, we have 2 minutes, so any final questions now would be the moment. Okay. Great. Okay, well, thanks a lot, guys. I sincerely hope this was helpful. I tried to make it at this time so that it's like a time zone that will work for most time zones. Not sure if that was a good idea at the end. Yeah, so yeah, I'll send the doc via email and the recording as well. Thank you very much for donating. I'll write a comment in the post as to with one final update. I may decide to do this more going forward. I hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, best of luck with debating and life in general.